see their homes again. Michael Sullivan, Sky News.
Well, Britain is...
Sky's Keith Graves has been watching developments as the soldiers make their preparations.
The approaches to the border crossing at Blace, the main route out for tens of thousands of refugees, and now the main route in for NATO forces, has been secured by Italian soldiers. It's Macedonian territory, but the ridge commanding it is inside Kosovo, and the Serbian army has positions there. This will be NATO's first objective, to ensure KFOR can move over the border safely. Just back from the border, nearly 2,000 men of the 5th Airborne Brigade, one para and the Gurkhas, are on 4-hour standby to move north in Chinook and Puma helicopters to secure the ridges and bridges and tunnels along the first vital 6 miles of the road inside Kosovo. He is assuming his men will be entering what the army calls a hostile environment.
I'm sure there'll be a substantial amount of ordnance there. And there's quite a lot of intelligence coming out now, but clearly mines, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, and perhaps some of the bridges may have been prepared for demolition, all of which will need to be cleared before we can declare any route that we're asked to clear, to be clear, and until we've done that, we won't be able to pass the armoured formations forward into the province.
The first of those armoured formations will be 650 men of the Spearhead Battle Group, with Challenger tanks and Warrior armoured vehicles. This is the so-called 12-hour force, the time the planners have given to secure and make safe that first stretch of road into Kosovo. After that, the rest of the 30,000-strong force will start pouring in by land and air. Speed is of the essence to ensure no vacuum is left between the departing Serbs and the arriving NATO forces, because a vacuum could be filled by ethnic Albanian irregulars bent on revenge against Serb civilians. If that happened, one kind of ethnic cleansing could be replaced by another. Keith Graves, Sky News, on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
NATO's resolve in conducting a sustained air campaign has finally achieved this agreement.
Out of Kosovo and the NATO forces go in, and the official was stressing very firmly that it was the wish and the desire, certainly, and in fact probably the fear of NATO to try and avoid any vacuum between them going in and the Yugoslav forces going out of Kosovo. And it's exactly on those points, exactly how this is supposed to be achieved, that they are finalizing and working out the details of in this former restaurant just 100 yards from me here.
Because that was a key point, wasn't it, in the talks at Blace and also, of course, in the tent too, about not creating a vacuum.
Absolutely, that is the case, and of course the unsaid question being, of course, that the forces of the Kosovo Liberation Army presumably, do not move into that vacuum, and that's, well, certainly been the political fear or thing that NATO has wanted to avoid, and presumably the Yugoslavs do not want KLA to move into the positions that they have and take over, if there is in any sense a long-stretched gap between the points at which they move out of Kosovo, as we've been hearing, as they seem to be preparing to do.
And we're also Raggy,
NATO gets in.
We're also, Raggy, seeing troop withdrawal, what we think of troops withdrawing, pictures from Podjevo.
Well, I mean, that's certainly been the indications for a few hours now. I mean, not from here, but from Brussels and elsewhere of NATO, saying that they are beginning to get evidence that Yugoslav forces are at least assembling ahead of actually pulling out and exiting from Kosovo. This is absolutely one of the fundamental elements that will determine not only the timing but also the pace at which NATO moves in to Kosovo. And it's been one of the essential stumbling blocks up until the signing of the military technical agreement last night between General Sir Mike Jackson, the NATO commander, and the Deputy Chief of General Staff of the Yugoslav Army, General Marjanovic. It's been one of the sticking points, certainly. How is this withdrawal supposed to be achieved? What time frame is it supposed to be done? How is it going to be verified? And once that's done, when and under what guise is NATO going to suspend the air campaign? But they have also made it clear that if this withdrawal agreement is in any way breached, the air campaign will be resumed.
Raggy, the next step, the vital step, is verification. That could come very soon, couldn't it?
It certainly could. I mean, I don't think that's going to be a technical problem, certainly for NATO, to be able to verify in any detail whether this withdrawal has begun and is taking place. After all, I mean, they have had the means to find, individual Serb tanks and artillery pieces during the air campaign. I don't think it's going to be a problem to actually ascertain whether, up to 40,000 Yugoslav forces, men, all their material, armaments, equipment is beginning to move out. I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's when that actually happens and that NATO headquarters in Brussels feels to its satisfaction that this withdrawal is genuinely underway, that the Secretary General of NATO, Javier Solana, is going to give the order to General Wesley Clark, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, to effectively suspend the air campaign.
Raggy Omar.
Those southern border seem to be in good spirits today. Not time for them to go yet, but already a goodbye wave across the hillside for Western cameras. Further north, Yugoslav army vehicles are reported to be on the move. Still not enough to count as a verifiable withdrawal, but NATO and Russian foreign ministers, who've worked so hard to push this peace deal through, are clearly optimistic.
Well, I was told on the way here that we have not yet had any firm evidence, but we expect that withdrawal to happen round about now, and hopefully we will have that firm evidence soon.
Ever since the British commander, General Jackson, emerged from the tent in Macedonia last night to announce his difficult talks with Yugoslav generals had ended in success, the atmosphere has changed dramatically.
I can confirm that General Marjanovic and General Stefanovic have signed the agreement on behalf of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and that I have signed on behalf of NATO.
Belgrade had agreed to an immediate ceasefire and speedy withdrawal, but for the Yugoslav general, it was the fact NATO bombing would give way to UN control of Kosovo that was the achievement.
The agreement on peace, it means that the war ended.
In Washington, a Pentagon briefing swiftly made clear Serb troops would have 11 days to complete a phased pullout, with Kosovo divided into 3 sectors. By the end of day 1, some troops must be leaving the northern sector. By day 5, all troops must be out of the southern sector. By day 8, all must be out of the central sector. And by the end of day 11, all Serb forces must have left Kosovo. Not all problems have been solved yet. Once the withdrawal starts and a NATO bombing pause follows, the United Nations still has to formally endorse the peace settlement. And even then, in Moscow, Russians and Americans are still arguing about how Russian troops will fit into a peacekeeping force with a single command that will probably be NATO-led.
That unity of command is very important. And unity of command means that all of Kosovo will be under one command arrangement.
And if the Russians don't like that, there's not much they can do about it. In northern Greece, American paratroopers were the latest NATO troops to come ashore on their way to the border. Once 50,000 or so Allied troops move into Kosovo, armed with tanks and a mandate to use force, their aim is to take possession quickly. Bridget Kendall, BBC News.
Well, there is a great mood of celebration here, as elsewhere throughout the Balkans, that this conflict appears to be over. In fact, one of the things KLA soldiers are doing this morning is making a welcome sign for NATO, placing white stones on a hillside to say the Uçiker, the KLA, welcomes you here to Kosovo. At the same time, though, while they've declared a ceasefire, they are saying a couple of things which I think may be of some concern to Western governments. The first is that they will move as swiftly as they are able into territory vacated by the Serbian forces as they leave. And the second is that they will not initially, at least, disarm. They will greet NATO with their guns in their hands, as they say is fitting for a military organisation.
Paul Wood, travelling with the KLA in Kosovo, Belgrade, Qershor's still of Yugoslav troops reportedly leaving Kosovo, waving farewell as NATO gets ready once verification is certain, and we'll hear from Brussels about verification, I suspect, from Javier Solana, to go in and on the heels of these Serbs. Jackie, you're seeing the troops withdraw. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, these are scenes that you wouldn't have seen in Kosovo a few weeks ago when I was last there. I mean, Serb forces were really very scared of being visible to NATO bombers overhead, and when you did see them moving, they were moving in commercial trucks, passenger buses. You wouldn't see these pieces of armoured equipment, these military ambulances. You would not see those driving, certainly not in convoy, for fear of being bombed. So these scenes really are something quite new in Kosovo since the conflict began. And to know that those people are gone before they're willing to contemplate returning. Obviously the presence of NATO will be a big confidence builder for them, but also the absence of people they might regard as a threat. And that, the question of security, is more important to them actually even than the physical state that they might find their own homes in when they go back.
The refugees hope they'll move into or back to a one Kosovo, a unified Kosovo, or is there still doubt about possible partition of a Kosovo?
I mean, officially that is something that's ruled out. Obviously we're looking at a plan whereby different parts of Kosovo will be supervised by the troops of different NATO countries, but then again that was the case in Bosnia as well. You know, we have the French in the south, the British and the Americans running military regions in the north. Of course, you know, Bosnia was divided along a Serb and Croat Muslim lines when the war was ended, but obviously that isn't part of a peace agreement. You know, there's no question in black and white of partition as being part of an agreement that has been drawn up for Kosovo.
Of course,
so intermixed, it was hard to be certain which was uppermost. Relief, joy, or a kind of defiant pride. Sometimes it was just drunken kids singing rude songs about Bill Clinton. The soldiers were the happiest and the most popular, and perhaps the most relieved as well. The official media here have portrayed the outcome as a complete victory for Yugoslavia, and last night plenty of people were prepared to accept that at face value. Then suddenly the streetlights were switched on after the weeks of blackout. For people who've spent 79 nights in the dark under the continual threat of bombs, it was a moment of sheer delight. By this morning, people wanted to know more about what had been agreed and who had done the backing down. Not that they'll have learned an awful lot from the government-controlled press, which manages not to mention NATO and presents everything as an agreement between Yugoslavia and the United Nations. The independent newspapers, though, have told people much more about what's going on. And in a city like this, where large numbers of people are educated and highly westernized, most of them know perfectly well what the real score is.
There are no victors, only losers, and Serbs are only losers, and Albanians are second losers, because they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, and they will never be able to live with Serbs ever again.
It's really weird. This whole situation is, you know, nobody asked Serbian people for all this war, and you know, it's some political thing that I have no idea.
Victory and for us and for them. It's equal, 50-50.
All the talk about victory is a very natural human reaction to what's happened. This country's gone through a terrible time in the past 11 weeks, and people badly want to feel that it all had some meaning, that everything they've been through was somehow worth it. So they tell themselves they've stood up against 19 of the strongest military powers in the world, far longer than anyone expected, and they try to salvage some pride for that. No doubt the mood will change at some point, but for now it's enough that the bombing has stopped and they need never hear another air raid siren in their lives. John Simpson, BBC News, Belgrade.
11-week bombing campaign, and you can see Javier Solana followed closely by NATO spokesman Jamie Shea. So let's go straight to Brussels and hear what they have to say.
Thank you for waiting patiently. The Secretary-General is here, and I'll ask him, of course, to address you now. Secretary-General, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I can announce that today that Milosevic has complied with the 5 conditions that the international community had placed And therefore, a few moments ago, I instructed General Clark to suspend NATO's air operations against Yugoslavia. I have taken this decision following consultations with the North Atlantic Council and also after confirmation from General Clark that the full withdrawal of the Yugoslav security forces from Kosovo has begun. The withdrawal of Yugoslav security forces from Kosovo is taking place, as you know, in accordance with the military technical agreement that was concluded between NATO and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia yesterday evening. It is also consistent with the agreement between the FRY and the European Union and Russian Special Envoys of June 3. Let me express to you that I have just written to Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan, and the President of the United Nations Security Council to inform them of these developments. Let me stress at this moment that I would urge all parties to the conflict to seize this opportunity for peace. I call on them to comply with their obligations under the agreements that have been concluded these past days and with all the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The violence must cease immediately. The Yugoslav security forces must withdraw, and all armed Kosovar groups must demilitarize. Violence or non-compliance by any party will not be tolerated. I would like to also take this opportunity to salute General Wes Clark, the Commander-in-Chief of this campaign, SACEUR, a man who has devoted day and night in the last months to get this result, this positive result for the people of Kosovo. I like also to salute his commanders and all the men and women of Operation Allied Force who have so bravely contributed too much to the cause of peace, to the cause of security for all the people of Kosovo.
Yugoslav radio and internet and so forth, they were talking about General Sir Mike Jackson, the commander of NATO's Allied Rapid Reaction Corps in Macedonia. They were referring to him as the UN general commanding the operation, and they have done nothing but refer to all the forces in Macedonia and Albania as United Nations forces. So it is very much a separate spin on the whole issue.
And on the other hand, Albania is saying it welcomes the Kosovo peace agreement as a victory for human values, but saying, unfortunately, the world should remain cautious while the Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic remains in power.
That is an issue. We have heard calls from some people in the Yugoslav opposition saying one actually talked about having denazification trials in Yugoslavia as a result of the Kosovo conflict to try and get rid of the more virulent elements of nationalism. But I don't see that happening in the short term.
Backing of the United Nations, the entry of military forces into Kosovo, led by the British Army, will begin. As soon as possible afterwards, the first refugees will start their journey home. There was no yearning on the part of NATO to commence this military action. I feel no sense of triumph now, only the knowledge that our cause was just and was rightly upheld. We tried hard to avoid conflict. For many months of patient negotiation, we strove hard for peace. But we had no serious negotiating partner in Milosevic. Instead, as you know, he began the policy of ethnic cleansing. We are all familiar with this term, but do not let the familiarity with it blind us to its hideousness. What it meant in reality for hundreds of thousands of innocent people in Kosovo was systematic murder and rape, brutality and barbarism, on a scale our continent of Europe thought we'd seen the last of in the dark days of World War II. So we were faced with a moral choice to let this barbarism happen or to stop it. We chose the right course. In doing so, we knew we could not prevent death and destruction for many people. But Milosevic now knows, and the world now knows, that we will not let racial genocide go on without challenge. We will not see the values of civilization sacrificed without raising the hand of justice in their defense. Nothing we say or do now can, of course, compensate for the loss of loved ones killed in this conflict. But I believe we can say that they did not die in vain. War is never civilized. The innocent die as well as the guilty. But war can be necessary sometimes to uphold civilization, and this one was.
Dort, wo die Menschen hausen, für die NATO ihre Angriffe gestartet hat, mehr Skepsis als Freude. Milosevic hat sein Wort dutzendmal gebrochen, so dieser Mann. Und der Alte fügt hinzu, wie können wir unter Menschen leben, die unseren Freunden die Kehle durchgeschnitten haben? Um die Sicherheit der Rückkehrer zu garantieren, läuft der Truppenaufmarsch der Alliierten in der Region auf Hochtouren. Am Morgen landeten US-Marines in Nordgriechenland. Und auch in Mazedonien wurden die amerikanischen Truppen verstärkt. Sie bilden gemeinsam mit Verbänden anderer NATO-Länder und Russlands die Kosovo-Friedenstruppe KFOR. Deutsche Soldaten sollen bereits in 3 bis 4 Tagen in das Kosovo einrücken.
So feierten die Menschen hier letzte Nacht den Frieden im Kosovo. Kurz vor 23 Uhr hatte der Rundfunk gemeldet, dass in Kumanovo ein Militärabkommen unterzeichnet sei, das den Frieden im Kosovo sichere. Minuten später tausende Menschen auf den Belgrader Straßen. Im Dunkeln, es gibt kaum Licht, seit die NATO die Kraftwerke zerstört hat. Immer wieder Rufe, Serbia, Serbia. Sie lassen ihr Land hochleben, nicht die Landesführung. Vereinzelt werden auch westliche Flaggen verbrannt. Dieser Soldat sagt uns, er sei auf Heimaturlaub, habe beim Slibowitz mit Freunden in einem Restaurant gesessen, als die Nachricht kam. Nun müsse er wohl nicht wieder ins Kosovo zurück. Sie könne schreien vor Freude, sagt sie. Jetzt beginne hoffentlich eine bessere Zukunft für alle Serben. Auch er hofft, jetzt werde alles besser. Wichtig sei, dass so schnell wie möglich der Wiederaufbau beginne. Für diesen Soldaten, der gerade zurück ist aus dem Kosovo, ist das Wichtigste, man habe Frieden und die Menschen sind glücklich. Es sei zu viel serbisches und albanisches Blut im Kosovo vergossen worden, sagt er, endlich Schluss damit. Autokorso, Gesänge und feuchtfröhliche Stimmung bis in die Morgenstunden hinein.
Belgrad feiert in dieser Nacht eine Art Karneval. Hier sind vor allem junge Leute auf den Straßen, junge Männer vor allem, die froh sind, jetzt nicht mehr mit der jugoslawischen Armee ins Kosovo ziehen zu müssen. Sie feiern Jugoslawien und sie feiern Serbien in dieser Nacht. Es ist nur die Frage, was wird dies für ein Serbien sein? Ein Serbien unter der Führung von Präsident Milosevic oder ein freies, ein demokratisches Land?
Wenn der Rausch verflogen sein wird, kommen die Fragen. Warum war dieser Krieg nötig? Kann Slobodan Milosevic dieses Land noch weiter regieren? Eine heftige innenpolitische Auseinandersetzung steht in Serbien vor der Tür.
This is what NATO's waited 11 weeks to see, Serb troops retreating from Kosovo. Belgrade had until late today to start its troops moving and 11 days to have them out of Kosovo altogether. NATO says it's satisfied now it can suspend its air campaign.
I can announce that today that Milosevic has complied with the 5 conditions that the international community had placed. And therefore, a few moments ago, I instructed General Clark to suspend NATO's air operations against Yugoslavia. I have taken this decision following consultations with the North Atlantic Council and also after confirmation from General Clark that the full withdrawal of the Yugoslav security forces from Kosovo has begun.
In Washington today, President Clinton said an end to the conflict meant hope for a new start.
In the past 4 months, we have seen some of the worst inhumanity in our lifetime. But we've also seen the bravery of our troops, the resolve of our democracy, the decency of our people, and the courage and determination of the people of Kosovo. We now have a moment of hope, thanks to all those qualities. And we have to finish the job and build the peace.
The Serb police too were on their way out of Kosovo today. This convoy seen leaving Pristina. But President Milosevic is refusing to see the withdrawal of his forces as a defeat.
We've shown that we have an invincible army, and I'm sure it's the best army in the world. When I say army, I want that to be understood in the broadest sense. I want that to mean the army, the police, and all the forces of state defense. They've shown the whole world how our people defend themselves and how firm and united they stand. They did so because the people were the army, and the army was the people.
In Cologne, G8 foreign ministers were today preparing the next steps. They've drafted a resolution for the UN Security Council, allowing for the deployment of the international peacekeeping force. The Security Council is expected to vote on that soon. The G8's looking at ways, too, of bringing long-term stability to all of the Balkans. The American Deputy Secretary of State is in Moscow at the moment, where Russia has welcomed the suspension of the airstrikes. He's there, though, to iron out differences over the structure of the international peacekeeping force. Russia is still insisting it will not submit its troops to NATO command. NATO says it fears separate commands could lead to the partition of Kosovo. NATO's ultimate goal is to bring home nearly 1 million refugees, but in the camps, joy at the imminent end of the conflict has been tempered with anxiety. These people don't know what they'll find when they finally return to Kosovo. Janet Barry, BBC News.
In the camps, there was relief, not really celebration, when they heard about the agreement. This morning, children didn't need much encouragement to chant Uçaka, the Albanian name for the Kosovo Liberation Army. Thoughts are starting to turn towards home. Qendresa said, "When I go back, I'll be with all my friends. We'll play and we'll go to school, and I'll be very happy." But a lot of